So in chapter 2, now we get into the real narrative of Jesus' birth.
Yes, we do. And for that reason, I still want to make a comment. Those of you who are dealing with the Believer's Road will, of course, eventually come into the section on polemic at the back of the book. The third polemic, giving much information about the virgin birth and why it doesn't hold water or stand up to scrutiny from the proof of the text themselves. And so for that reason, I had desire to make some comments in almost, I don't know what percentage of the Christian church, but every Catholic church, every Lutheran, Episcopalian, Presbyterian church, and many, many, many beyond, almost every Sunday, the people who are gathered for worship are required to recite the Apostles' Creed and to say in front of God and each other, I believe in the virgin birth. And that is one of the ways I believe the church perpetuates error, when it locks into creedal positions things that most of those people, do not believe. At least when I have participated, they have said, well, nobody takes it seriously. So I'm saying, okay, so now we're in an institution that's encouraging us to lie in front of our own God when we worship. And that's, quite frankly, very offensive to me. But in any case, I do not believe in the virgin birth, and I have this concern. So I understand why people love the stories. I was pastor for 50 years, and I preached many, many sermons. I like Matthew a little better, only because the stories were even more juicy, if you will. And I love the fact that we have astrologers in the story. Now we call them wise men or kings, but literally in Greek it's astrologers, and they're telling a story about a magnificent star. So it's an astrology story, of why Jesus has a very special birth chart unlike anybody else who ever lived. Well, that resonates with me just fine. I wish it were true in that level sometimes, but since it's not, I think it's time for the church to look at it and face it. So what I found out is, when I would preach, I thought some very fine sermons about how there aren't 3 astrologers. That's because we got careless with the text. There's 3 gifts, not 3 magi. And that actually ruins Matthew's point. The point is, every Christian must bring the 3 gifts. And they declare him prophet, priest, and king, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so, powerful. But how do you separate? What I discovered over and over, to my dismay, is that no matter how well I preached it, the people would take that and turn it and twist it back into the fact that, well, now I believe in the virgin birth. So I decided finally, and too late, there's only one way to deal with that, and that's to stop honoring the stories until we realize this cannot drive our theology. Okay? What's wrong with the theology? Luke is trying to tell a story that helps us to follow Jesus. Does the virgin birth help us to follow Jesus? Can anybody get born of a virgin if they want to? I couldn't, and I haven't been. But what's the real birth that matters? We're back to baptism, the true Christmas, the true conversion, the true entrance. Can anybody get born of the Spirit? You must be born anew. You must, to get onto this path. That's the one that counts. So the virgin birth also, undoes all the meaningful parts of the incarnation. Jesus isn't like us anymore. And then it goes from there on to endless things that I think have, suggested that sex is wrong and bad, and that we should be following Mary and instead of following Jesus. And we would much rather have Mary soft and helping us to be. Well, never mind. I should stop right there.
Before you get in too much trouble, huh?
No.
And again, we hold a similar view in the sense that these stories are not historical. I do ask myself, well, whoever wrote this narrative, what were they trying to tell us? Or in my mind, how is Luke trying to set us up for what Jesus is about, too? And I do find some things very intriguing, and also that resonate with the rest of the gospel as well. For instance, in Luke's gospel, as opposed to Matthew's, there are the revelation that something's going to happen is to the shepherds, not to magi or astrologers. There are no astrologers in Luke, and there are no shepherds in Matthew. They each have their unique point of view, and each are to be taken authentically, separately. But so Luke, or whoever wrote this, is envisioning shepherds. Well, shepherds were very much on the margins of society. Even today, shepherds who continue in Israel are very much on the margins of society, always have been. And so you have these very marginalized people who are raising lambs and sheep, and they're raising them right out near Bethlehem. Now, according to the Talmud, those lambs that would have been raised between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, those were the ones that were used for temple sacrifice. I find that rather interesting, especially as we go later to Jesus as the Lamb of God, and there's already some foreshadowing there. But even more particularly, I mean, the New Testament knows a lot about lambs. Lambs even come up in the final book, Revelation, very centrally in the figure of Arnion, the lambkin, the little tiny baby. Arnion in Greek means not only just simply lamb, but a newborn lamb, a weakling lamb that's just a very feeble lamb. And that is going to take on, in Revelation, the beast, or Therion. And so you have this symbol of this very powerful beast being actually overthrown by this terribly weak little lambkin. And the message of Revelation, contrary to what we hear a lot in these popular stories, is really that, just as Paul articulates it, my power is made perfect in weakness. That this power of there's great power in this utterly vulnerable lambkin, or even slain lambkin in Revelation. And now we have, back to our narrative in Luke, though, is these shepherds who are very much the most vulnerable in society, or among the most anyway, taking care of these little lambs that are being used for sacrifice in the temple. To me, really preaches again that this Messiah is not going to be the power figure that you expect. It's not going to be the one that's going to overthrow the Romans. That the kind of revolution of this Messiah is going to be one that really fulfills Paul's words, that God's power is made perfect in weakness. And to me, that's a very interesting thing to contemplate. It'd be a very good discussion topic, I think, for the groups. Another piece of it, going towards the end of the chapter, but not quite there, but they are presented in the temple. Mary and Joseph present Jesus in the temple then, as is supposed to happen. And the gift they make there, the sacrifice, is of a couple of doves, which is only actually made when you are terribly poor. So that's, I find interesting. But also interesting is the reaction that takes place. You have this amazing priest, Simeon, who's been waiting for the kingdom of God to come forever and a day, and finally, somehow recognizes that, oh my gosh, it's in this little baby is before me. He basically says now, take me now. I've seen your glory. Take me now. I'm ready. But there's this other figure that rarely gets noticed, and her name is Anna, or would have been Hannah in Hebrew, and it says that she is a prophet. Well, I wonder about that term, the prophet. I mean, she is a widow, and she says she's been married for the first 7 years, and then had been a widow until she was 84 in Jesus' day. So it's been at least 60 years she's been a widow. It says she's showing up at the temple every day. She fasts all the time. I don't see so much a temple functionary as I do someone who's poor and who's utterly dependent upon people who come to the temple to give her food. I envision this, and now I'm launching into my fictitious imagination here a bit. When I think of Anna, whose name means grace, I think of Gracie, the bag lady. She's showing up, by the temple. She's been widowed forever. She's desperately, therefore, poor, depending upon the generosity of others who come. And yet, when this Messiah enters the complex in the form of this little baby, somehow she recognizes it, and suddenly she's changed from Gracie, the bag lady, to Grace, the prophet. And so oftentimes our encounter with this strange and fascinating character of Jesus does that to us. It takes us at our most estranged, most alienated forms and creates something of magnificence from them. The Gracie the bag ladies become Grace the prophets, the poor and desperate, or the failed person inside each one of us through touching that child or encounter with the Christ. We find a sense of awe and wonder not only in what we find in that God that we encounter, but something lights up within each of us and brings us to higher stature. So I'm not ready to throw out these stories, even that I am certainly ready to say they're not historical. If you're disturbed by either one of us talking about the non-historical nature, think about what you do with your Christmas decorations every year. Likely, many of us have Christmas decorations that go clear back to when we were, even in grade school. I do. And we take them out every year and we say, wow, it brings back those memories of where we were when we were in 6th grade or when we were in 10th grade or what have you, or when we were first married or when our first child was born. We have all those ornaments that mark our stages of life, and then we take them out, we glory in them, and then we wrap them up carefully and we put them away. And to me, that's kind of what these narratives do. We can look at the way we have considered the Christmas narratives over time, and we can have a sense of awe and wonder of what we got out of them at the time, but at some point it's also appropriate to wrap them up and put those old understandings away. I mean, we may have once believed in a virgin birth, and we don't have to denigrate that. We can stand and look at that and what we took from that at the time, and then we can wrap that one up. We can look at when we shed that belief and what we got out of that. Just as our different understandings of the Christmas story go along, we don't have to throw it all away, but nor do we have to be dependent upon old ways of thinking.